Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about decks that I use when I'm all up in my feelings. So I've talked about a few of these decks, this one in particular, and this deck and the feeling related to it is kind of the deck that got me thinking about this topic in a broader scope. So I have talked about rage decks. I talked about it in my January reflections, how I use this deck when I am feeling very ragey. And so that got me thinking about the other decks that I use when I'm feeling in a very particular emotional state. So I realized that I actually have quite a few decks that I use when I'm all up in my feelings. So today I thought we would just go through and talk about them. So I'm going to start with the Mars Power Tarot because this is the deck that I've talked about most recently. This is the deck that I now consider my rage deck. Here's the backs, and I'll just flip through cards as we're chatting about it. This is going to be really low-key, chatty, fun video, hopefully. I love this deck. I didn't think I would love this deck. I am slowly collecting all the decks by this creator now because of this one deck. I also do have the Jupiter Power Tarot, which I absolutely love, but that really isn't connected to an emotional state. And really the decks that we're looking at today are decks that are very attuned to one of my emotional states of being. So this rage deck, the Mars Power Tarot, is the deck that I use whenever I'm feeling ragey. Now, rage is a very specific emotion. It's a little bit different than anger. It's different than being mad. It's different than being upset, right? Rage is fire. It can be passion. It can be anger, but it can also be a lot of other things mixed in, because it is a thing that I think doesn't get talked about enough as a valid emotion. There's positive and negative ways that you can express your rage. One of, I think, the more positive ways to do that is through the tarot. And so I think having a rage deck is really fantastic because it allows you to use the deck to kind of channel that energy into something productive, right? Because we can take the tarot deck, we can let it kind of hold that energy, we can use it to create a reading, and then that will give us something to do with that energy and that feeling state that we're in. However, sometimes you just need to be in that feeling state. And that's one of the things that I really love this deck for, because as I talked about in my monthly reflection, this deck doesn't really tell me what to do with my rage or how to fix it. It just holds space for it. And that's something that I think I really need, right? It doesn't try to change it. It doesn't try to negate it. It doesn't try to fix it. It just creates space for it. It just holds it and allows it to be what it is. And it validates that rage in the moment, right? It validates that fury, that fire, that passion, whatever it is. It holds space for it, validates it, and just allows it to be. And I absolutely love that. I have lots of decks that I use for trying to figure my shit out, right? Lots of decks that I use for trying to find my way with things and to sort of fix my emotional state of being, right? And sometimes I just need to sit in it. And this deck is fantastic for that because it does just allow me to sit in and experience the rage in what I feel is a healthy way. And this is only just me speaking from my me place, right? From my own personal experiences. Your results may vary. But for me, this deck just holds space for it. It allows me to sit in it. It allows me to experience it, to flow through it, and to come out the other side, which I really appreciate. It doesn't try to fix it because not every emotional state needs to be fixed, right? Sometimes we just need to experience them and remember that emotions are temporary. They're a flow and they will move through us. We will move through them if we just give ourselves the space and the time to kind of experience it and then move on from it. And I think a deck like this is really great for that. Again, this is just the way that I've experienced this particular deck. For me, it just really holds space for that rage. It validates it. It allows me to experience it, to move through it. And then I am able to go on. And I talked about in my reflection video how I often pull an oracle card at the end to kind of have that takeaway message when working with this deck. But I love it. I think it's really cool. I think it's really beautiful. It's very fiery. It's very in your face. And for me, I feel like it really embodies rage as an emotion and as an energetic state. And it kind of creates space for that, which I absolutely love. All right, I'm just kind of randomly grabbing decks here because while I have the decks all laid out, I don't really have a specific way I want to talk about them. These two decks represent my angsty side. So when I'm feeling a little bit bratty. So I pulled these two out together. This is the Beautiful Creatures Tarot and the Disney Villains Tarot. I pulled them out together because I almost always use them together now, but they also equally represent that angsty side of myself. So when I'm being bratty, when I'm feeling like a little bit villainous, this is a fantastic little deck and combo. I have shared these in combo and in, playing with pairs and things like that, I'm pretty sure. And I do really, really love them together. I tend to use the Beautiful Creatures more as an oracle. I set it in the center with the two villains on either side. This deck, though, just embodies all that angsty, sort of villainous kind of, I'm gonna be a brat sort of energy, which is an energy that I sit in quite frequently these days. Kind of inner teenager-y self comes through when I'm working with these decks, and I love it. And again, it's another deck and sort of deck combo like the Mars Power that really holds space for that side of me and it allows it to come out. One of the things that I like to use these decks for is not only when I'm feeling in that space and I'm being bratty, right? I'm feeling very bratty. Let's take a look at the Beautiful Creatures now. It's also the deck that I use, or the combo that I use when I am not in a space where I can express that. This is really in my way. There we go. So when I'm like feeling that angsty, bratty energy, but like I can't express it right now because like I have to be a grown-up or whatever, right? Like I have to do my things, I have to do my chores, have to do my homework, whatever it is, right? When I have to be in a different sort of space, but this is what I'm feeling. I love pulling these two out particularly together for that because it kind of gives me a place to direct it, and I can do a little reading, play with these cards, step into this gorgeous imagery, which for me just embodies that sort of angst, and kind of allow that side of me to come out here instead of in sort of, I'm just going to say inappropriate, because sometimes it is, inappropriate ways and places. So when I'm like in the space where I need to be like doing the grown-up things and I can't be an angsty little brat right now, but I'm really feeling it, I'll pull these two decks out to play with that. I'll just real quickly here, just because we're playing. I'll show you them together because they are amazing together. I really, really love, like the purples even go together. I really love the way they read together. I love the energy of these two decks. And for me, they just really embody that sort of inner teenager, angsty, I don't want to do my homework, I just want to goof off, I just want to be a brat, I just want to be a little bit naughty, a little bit villainous. These are the decks that I go to for that, and they just hold that space so beautifully for me. And also, they do give me sort of a message of what to do with that energy, right? Like, how can I best work with that? How can I best express it, move through it, so that I'm not taking that into places in my life where it shouldn't be showing up right now. So I love these two together. I love when the colors align. So great. Yeah, these are I'm feeling angsty, feeling bratty. These are the two decks that I definitely go to for that energy. So let's talk about a couple of newer decks in my collection. I mean, the Mars Power is pretty new to me as well, but a couple newer decks that are like finding their place in my sort of emotional landscape decks. This is the Goddess of Love Tarot. Now this is very, very new, and I've really only used it a handful of times. I used it for the first time in a member video, and I was just doing a sort of self-love reading on Valentine's Day, which kind of took an interesting turn. This to me, and I've been playing with a little bit since then, this to me, sitting in that space of when I'm kind of feeling like a little bit flirty, right? A little bit flirty, a little bit naughty in that sense. Not like villain's beautiful creature, bratty kind of naughty, but this is more like the sensual kind of naughty, right? The flirty kind of naughty. And that could be because mostly because of the context of the deck and the guidebook. So there's a lot of mention about sex and love and passion in the guidebook. And I feel like that is really influencing my understanding of this deck and where it's sitting for me. And it is the artwork as well. I think the artwork is really beautiful. I love fairly minimalistic collage in the sense of collage, right? Some of them are more so than others, but it's a little bit pippy in places, which I actually do really like. There's all the beautiful red flowers and all the beautiful sensual imagery. And I just think it fits really well into that I'm feeling a little bit flirty space. And so this is the deck that I've been playing with when I'm feeling sort of in that emotional state, which has been really fun just to kind of explore it. I've mixed it with some other decks, which have been really fun. And I do get into the guidebook. This Crone of Swords is amazing. I love her. I do get into the guidebook a lot when I'm working with this deck because for one, it's still new to me, so I'm still finding my way with it, but also because I like the write-ups and I think that the way that the cards are depicted through this really passionate, slightly erotic, kind of flirty sort of lens is really cool. It's really different. I don't have a lot of decks that I feel like sit in this space in my collection. And so to have this one really kind of cement itself so far in that space has been really cool, and I've been really enjoying it. I've gone back and forth in the red borders. I've talked about it several times with my members. I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I could do it. But the more I work with it, the more I actually like the red borders. So right now they're staying. I may eventually trim them off. This is a mass market deck. So like if I decide to trim it and it goes horribly wrong, I'm like, it's okay. I can replace it. I'm not in the habit of replacing decks, but occasionally it does happen. Anyway, this is a great one, I think, for sort of encapsulating that energy of I'm feeling flirty. I want a little flirty message to go with the energy of what I'm feeling right now. And so this is a deck that I've been playing with for that. I think it sits in that space really, really well, and it's been really fun to get to know it. So another fairly new deck in my collection, this is the Tabletop Tarot. This, I mean, I've talked about it a lot in the last couple of months because this deck has not left my table since I got it, which I think was maybe November of last year. It's a deck that I had pre-ordered. It's an indie deck, and it is a D&D inspired deck that has a lot of, I guess you might call them pop culture in the D&D world references. There's a lot of Critical Role references and things like that in here, which are amazing. And this for me, I say it all the time, this is my Legends and Lattes deck. So if you've read the book, Legends and Lattes by Travis Baltrey, I think it is. This for me is that book wrapped up in a tarot deck. And I love that card. That's so the energy of it. So for me, this deck has actually kind of become my comfort deck. It's become my deck when I'm feeling particularly what I call squishy. So when my emotions are really charged in kind of a I'm gonna cry kind of way, right? This is the deck that I go to for that. Not because it like makes me cry or anything like that. It's because it sort of comforts me, it holds me, it creates space for the things that I need to experience in the moment. And it's often the deck that I've been finding myself pulled to during those times. So while I've used it for all kinds of things, all kinds of readings, like I said, this deck has not left my table since I got it. And that speaks volumes because I store my decks. They have very specific homes where they live in my office, and in particular baskets and things like that. This deck, however, just stays out. It just stays out all the time, and I'm always getting into it and I'm always pulling from it. And I use it for all kinds of readings. But really where this deck sits for me in the emotional landscape is it is my comfort deck. It is I'm feeling particularly squishy right now and I don't know what to do with that. So I go to this deck and I pull cards from it, and it just holds me and comforts me in a way that no other deck in my collection seems to right now. It makes me happy. It makes me feel better. It makes me smile. And that's often an energy I need when I'm feeling very vulnerable, very in that squishy space. And this is the deck that I go to, and it just gives me exactly what I need in the moment. So again, me trying to articulate felt experience, but here we go again. So that's the Tabletop Tarot. I absolutely love that one. It's gonna go right back on its little home on my desk. All right, apparently we're just gonna bounce around all over the place. The next deck that I wanna share with you all is my Joie de Vivre Tarot. This is the deck that I go to when I'm in a bad mood and I don't wanna be. So this is like, I have lots of good mood decks. I've done whole videos on good mood decks, thanks to Maureen, Waves of Your Soul. If you've not seen her videos on good mood decks, definitely go check them out. I'll link her channel below so you can see them, because she definitely inspired the good moods deck idea for me. And while I have lots of good moods deck, this is the deck that I go to when I'm in a bad mood and I don't want to be anymore. Because there's just something about this art, these characters in particular, the way that the energy of this deck just reads for me, it just feels like bottled sunshine. There's a couple of oracle decks that I pair it with, and I'm pretty sure I've done it in a playing with pairs. Really tap into that sunshine, and I just want to be happy. I just want to feel better, like kind of energy. So when I'm in a bad mood and I don't want to be anymore, I pull out this deck because it makes me happy. I love these characters. The art is charming and whimsical and fun, and there's a lot of like warm tones, warm yellows and oranges that just kind of feel like sunshine in a deck. I mean, I have lots of decks that are like way brighter than this and all of that, that maybe like in a more aesthetic way look like the sun. But for me, it's an energetic thing. This deck feels like sunshine. It feels like happiness in this sweet, comforting, fun little world. And when I'm in a bad mood, like I will pull this deck out and just shuffle it and pull cards because they make me happy every time I look at them. And it just kind of gives me a break from the bad mood, right? It might not necessarily take me completely out of my bad mood depending on why I'm in a bad mood, but it definitely helps. It like takes the edge off. And sometimes that is just what I need, man. I just need the edge taken off a little bit because I'm feeling a little bit prickly and like I don't want to carry that into other aspects of my life or direct that towards other people. So sometimes I use this for a little bit of a mood shift just to kind of get me out of a bad mood, and it makes me happy. So I love that. We are just gonna bounce around all over the place, which feels very fitting for a video talking about being all up in my feelings, because a lot of times my feelings are all over the place. This is my Diablo Tarot. I've talked about this one quite a bit on my channel as well. I love this deck. It's up in my, probably like my top favorites. And the thing is, the interesting thing about this deck is I've been trying to kind of figure out like where it sits for me, what emotional landscape does it really embody, because it is a deck that I use a lot. And it is a deck that I use for very emotionally charged things. And where I've kind of landed on is this is the deck that I go to when I'm feeling kind of lost, when I'm feeling a little bit hopeless. It often has to do with things around family dynamics, and that's just a weird, very me thing. But when I'm feeling like things are just a little bit outside of my control, when I'm feeling like I've got nothing left to give, nowhere left to go with this particular thing. And yeah, hopeless. Hopeless is the word, because sometimes I feel hopeless. I feel like I can't anymore. There's nothing I can do about this. There's nothing that's in my control or whatever the case may be, right? I can't make a difference here. And the thing about this deck is, even though it's probably a really weird association, this deck, just for whatever reason, shifts me out of that. It shows me where I can make a difference, where I can bring the hope back to the situation, like my own personal hope, right? Because sometimes the situations that I'm doing readings about with this deck really are beyond my control. And the only thing that I can do is manage my own expectations, my own emotions, my own reactions to things. I can't change how other people behave, but I can change how I behave in response to them. And so that's what this deck does. It helps me look at where I can make changes in response to things that are going on and where I can find the hope again. And I know that probably sounds really weird given the art and the style of this deck. It is based on Diablo, on the video game by Blizzard. I really, really hoping Blizzard does a World of Warcraft deck. That would be amazing. But I do also know the games. I know the lore. I've played. I'm still playing Diablo at this point with my husband. And so there's all of that that gets wrapped into it as well. But I love the star. Let's leave it on the star because that one's amazing. I just find that this deck is the one that I go to when I'm feeling lost, when I'm feeling hopeless. That's the word. And I love this star for that because that is what this deck does. It gives me hope. It helps me find my way through those dark moments. And it's just amazing for that. So let's just kind of sit in that sort of sad emotional landscape for a minute because I want to talk about this deck. This is the Nicoletta Ciccoli Tarot. This deck I have multiple copies of. I've done journals, a full journal on. Like I've done a lot of work with this deck over the years. This is my Wounded Inner Child deck, and that is a very specific feeling state. I do tend to pull this deck out anytime I'm kind of experiencing any sort of trauma or triggers that are related to childhood things. Like anytime anything presses up against a trigger for me of something that's related to childhood stuff, I will pull out this deck. Sometimes I also pull out this deck when I need to kind of connect to that inner child self. It's really weird to have a deck, I think, that sits, or at least for me personally, that sits in those two spaces. Like, it's trauma for sure. This deck is full of trauma for me, meaning that it helps me to work through those traumas. But it's also a deck that I go to when I want to sort of speak to the inner child, which isn't necessarily always wounded. And I love that about this deck, because like this card, you know, really does feel like a wounded inner child card. Like there's some darkness going on here for sure. But then this one could definitely feel like just speaking to the inner child, right? As this one too. But then here we're back to like scared and wounded inner child. So I kind of love that it does both, because it really sits in that space for me of just being a deck that I can communicate with the inner child with. I have other decks that I can use for that as well, but this is the deck that I've done the most work with, the one that I feel the most emotionally connected to. And that's really what all these decks are that we're talking about today, right? These are decks that I am very deeply emotionally connected to in some way, shape, or form. And I could have pulled more, but I was just trying to really hit on the ones that were the deepest connections to me right now, the ones that I am most bonded to, that I'm most connected with, that really hit in a particular emotional state. Now, if I did this video again next year, some of these will probably change. Some of them, like this one, probably won't. I could never imagine my collection not having this deck in it. I could never imagine not using this deck anytime things like that come to the forefront for me, because it's such an important tool when it comes to doing that sort of work. And sometimes that stuff happens out of nowhere. I had it happen a couple weeks ago where there was a little bit of a trigger for me. It had absolutely nothing to do with childhood stuff in terms of like the actual thing that happened, but it brought up childhood traumas for me, and I had to work through that process. And this deck was, you know, amazing. It was there as it always is for that, along with my very dear friends. And so I couldn't imagine not having this one in my collection. So there's some of these decks I think will stay maybe for a lifetime sitting in these spaces, and some of them are more of where I am in the moment. So it'd be interesting to see, and maybe I'll try to like make a note to self to do that. Maybe once a year, just kind of sit and go through decks, my collections, like the decks that I'm feeling the most emotionally connected to at the moment. I think it would be interesting to see how those ebb and flow over the years, and to see the ones that don't change, because this one hasn't changed for years. Alrighty, so let's move along to a deck that is kind of like the opposite of that in a sense, actually. This is the Pythonic Tarot. This deck for me really speaks to my inner self as I am now. So where the Nicoletta Ciccoli is kind of the inner child sense of me, this is the sense of me here and now. And the thing I like about this deck, even though a lot of the characters do look kind of young in their depictions, that's not a dig at the deck. As an artist or somebody who's attempting to be an artist, like drawing age is really, really difficult. But this deck to me feels timeless. The figures in it feel timeless. They feel ageless. And for me, this deck represents kind of the where I'm at right now, how I'm feeling right now, and the things that I work with on an internal space at this point in my life. So it feels very deep and connected to who I am right this moment, right at this time in my life. I've been pairing this with a couple of other decks, and it's been really interesting to see how those coming together. I've been using this deck quite a bit to kind of just like represent me in a reading. This is me and this is where I'm at, and then I'll use another deck to look at like the situation or you know, other things that are going on, where this specifically is like, here's your emotional landscape, right? My emotional landscape, my sense of self, my core being, and what that represents comes through this particular deck. And it's been really great to use it in that way. As far as like an emotional landscape deck, really what this deck does is just connect to the kind of like core source of my emotional state of being. This is like the stem. It's like the core, the root, right, of the emotional self. And that's kind of what this deck represents. And it's such a fantastic one for that. I love this one. The Queen of Wands on top. She's amazing. This deck for me just kind of represents me and my emotional landscape, like kind of at its root, at its core. So let's talk about the Astral Mermaid Tarot, because this one is kind of like the opposite of the Pythonic. This particular deck, even though it's mermaids, it's the weirdest thing, man. This to me is the deck that I use. Here's the beautiful backs. I love this deck. That I use to represent, or what it does represent for me, is my cosmic sense of self. And I think because it is mermaids, because even though like it does feel very spacey, there is a lot of water in this deck, it feels very connected to my cosmic self in the emotional realm. So like it's what my cosmic self feels, right? It's what my soul self, my self that's, you know, I often joke about my feet being planted on the ground, but my like heart and soul and everything else is like up roaming the cosmos, right? Which is, it sounds very woo, but it's the only way I've managed to figure out any way to kind of explain it. This represents that side of me that is kind of out, like, you know, wandering the cosmos, man. And I want to know how everything works. And I want to like, I don't know, read about physics and about esoteric topics and study alchemy. And I want to know what the planets are doing right now. And I want to know what's going on in the solar system, in the cosmos, like just all of those weird things that just like are in my brain all the time. This deck kind of represents that. And it's an interesting thing. It's when I use this deck when I feel like I need that connection to that part of me that's larger than what I am right this moment. It's interesting. It's a deck that when I'm feeling really small, when I'm feeling be unheard, unseen, when I shrink myself to fit to somebody else's expectations of me, this is often a deck that I go to because it feels larger than that. It feels expansive. It feels like it makes space for me to open up to that, to move through that, and to really experience it in a way that feels in alignment with that sort of cosmic self, right? That soul self, that sense of self that like I've been here before, I've done this before, and I'm gonna do it again type of a thing. So again, felt experience, that's the whole point of this video. Let me just go ahead and make a whole video where I'm trying to describe a felt experience in words. Look at this strength card. I love it. I love it. Anyway, yeah, it's a great one. I love this deck. It just is such a beautiful one for when I'm feeling small and I need to expand and I need to create space for myself to expand. This is often the deck I go to for that. So again, on the flip side of that, we have the She-Wolf Tarot, which is a deck that I go to when like I am fully expanded and in my personal power. And that's kind of how I like to see this deck. This is my sort of personal power deck. Here's the beautiful backs. I love this deck. It is definitely one of my favorites in my collection. It feels very feminine, very strong, very powerful, and it is unapologetic. And I really love that about it. I also really love the Serpent Fire, which is another deck by this creator. And it's also a fantastic one for stepping into that sort of power. But for me, that one actually feels like it steps more into the masculine within the feminine, if that makes sense, where this one feels fully like full feminine power. And I love it. It's the one that I go to when I am either sitting fully in my own personal power, my own creative power, whatever it is, as well as the deck that I go to when I'm needing to get into that, when I'm feeling like that's the space that I need to be in to do the things that I need to do right this 5 minutes. I'll often pull cards from this deck to give me a message for that. But as far as like the feeling state, man, this is personal power. This is unapologetically being me and not worrying about what other people think about what I'm doing or how I'm doing it. You know, it's being unapologetic. That's such a great word for this deck. And sometimes that's a space that I need to be in and a space that I do feel in. And this is often a deck that I will go to for that because it really does not only validate that, but it also mirrors that back to me. It also shows me how to do it when I'm not feeling in that space, but that's where I need to be for whatever reason. Sometimes we just need to step into our own personal power and we need to be larger than life. And this deck for me is the deck that does that, and I love it. It's one of my favorites. All right, and the last deck we're going to talk about is the Notoria, the Tarot in Light deck. And this is the newest deck of all of these that we've looked at today. Not the newest in my collection, but the newest that we've looked at today. So there's a story with this deck. This is my boyfriend deck. Here's the backs. So I'm sure, as you all know by now, Lisa and I are playing Baldur's Gate together. And there's a whole thing. It's a whole, like, the game has a whole like romancing a character aspect, and that's the thing that we're doing. We are romancing this character in the game. I mean, we're also playing the game too, but if you want to hear more about it, you can check out the last tarot in practice that Lisa and I did together on her channel. I'll link it below, because we did actually talk about this game and how this game has actually helped us move through a lot of different things. It really helped both of us with our burnout. For me personally, I'm discovering that the game, the characters, the stories are helping me move through a lot of things in my own personal life, a lot of emotional things that I need to be working on. And so I ended up buying this deck because to me, this represented one aspect of the story of one of the characters in the game that we are really focusing on. Well, it's upside down, that we are really focusing on his experience. And so we call him boyfriend, and this is my boyfriend deck. This is a lot of people's boyfriend deck now, which is amazing because there's a lot of us in the community playing that game. Also, if you are playing Baldur's Gate and you are romancing Astarion, please send me a screenshot of your character with Astarion because I am doing a thing. But anyway, this deck for me represents that very specific thing and the very specific emotional landscape that experience brings about. For me personally, this deck is a little bit bitey, and if you know the character that we call boyfriend, it makes sense. He's a vampire, he's kind of bitey. He's also a little bit sassy and snarky and all of that as well. And this deck is really interesting because I know it's an angel deck. There's a whole context around this deck in itself, right? Like if you read the guidebook and everything, I have completely discounted any of that when it comes to working with this deck. This deck to me is a very specific aspect of that character and a very specific aspect of the feelings and the emotional state that I sit in when I'm interacting with that particular side of the character. Sometimes this deck is mean. This deck has made me cry on more than one occasion. I still love it, but it's also funny enough when I am feeling in that space. It's like, I'm gonna say it sounds silly, like the deck knows, right? When I'm feeling in that space of I'm already there, I'm already in that space of I'm feeling just, I don't know, like lost and overwhelmed, and I just need a little bit of comfort. Sometimes this is the deck that I go to, and I know sometimes it's gonna bite me, but it does it in a way that that's what I need, right? If that makes sense. So that's what I need in the moment. That's what it delivers. And it's, again, really hard. It's a whole thing, man. It's a whole thing with this deck and this character in this game. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's all roped into that. And I'm not going to attempt to try to explain it here. This was actually the deck, besides the Rage deck, this was actually the deck that I was thinking about when I was thinking about creating this video, because I was like, there is a very, very strong, very significant emotional connection to this deck. Now, because it's newer and because I'm still finding my way with it, I haven't 100% like nailed in on it, but it's there and I can feel it. So this was the deck that kind of started that. And then, you know, I was thinking about the Rage deck and all of that. Also, like all the characters, or most of the characters, I get they're angels, but they also mostly have white hair. And that's just, yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing, man. Okay, so I'm gonna stop babbling about that, but this is my boyfriend deck. I have another boyfriend deck, but I haven't used it near as much as this one. This one just feels like it really sits in that space. And this is the one that I'm really working with right now through all of those different aspects. So there you go. Those are a handful of the decks that I use when I am all up in my feelings. These are the ones that are probably like the most emotionally significant for me. So like I said, they're the ones that I've chosen for this moment. That might change later on down the line, but for right now, that's where we're sitting. I would love to know if you have any decks that you like go to when you're in a specific emotional state. So definitely feel free to drop it in the comments below or make a video response. That would be amazing. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.